Today on Monday Mods, we're going to do a little bit of work on one of my dailies. It's been a long, harsh winter, and we need to do a couple of maintenance items on the front end of the 2003 Chevy Trailblazer. So today what I'm going to do is I'm going to diagnose and repair what's going on with the front end of the Trailblazer. Over the course of the winter, I've had a couple of little issues. My symptoms are a loud roaring noise that gets louder and higher pitched, congruent to the speed of the vehicle, and also around 40 miles an hour or faster, I've noticed that the steering feels just a little bit loose. So I'm going to inspect the front end of this and show you guys how I do that, what I found, and how to fix it. Okay, so we're going to start by lifting the vehicle, not by the control arm. If you do that, you may not be able to test the ball joint. And then next we're going to start by shaking down the front end, left to right and up and down. You can see here I have quite a bit of play left to right. We're going to go underneath, shake it, and see what's causing that. And then we also have a little bit of play up and down. Not the worst, but it's definitely there. Wheel bearings you can sometimes test by spinning the wheel, and you can listen for it. And also if you put your hand on the spring while you're spinning it, you can sometimes feel the vibration through the spring as it resonates very well there. So I'll try to get this spinning here. You can probably hear that noise there. Okay, let's move to the underside of the car. So upon initial inspection from the underside of the vehicle, first we can see that we've got a clamp here, which is actually supposed to be on this bellow boot to the rack and pinion, which is supposed to cover the inner tie rod. You can see the end of that is a little bit messed up. That's not a major deal, but it is supposed to keep dirt and moisture from getting to the seal at the end of the rack, so that could lead to some expensive problems in the future. Now we're gonna have Kyler shake the wheel left and right. Okay, you can see our movement here, right here in the tie rod. Sometimes it's kind of hard to feel if there's not very much. You can actually put your finger in between there and feel it pinch your finger, just like that there. Okay, Kyler, go ahead and stop. And sometimes, look, even though there's almost no up and down play, sometimes there will be, but most of the time you can't feel it up and down, only left to right. Okay, Kyler, go ahead and shake it up and down. If you look where the CV axle goes in here, this is actually the back of the wheel bearing, and you can see that it wiggles a little bit right there. Another place you can look is the brake rotor in reference to like the backing plate or the ball joint. Again, you can put your finger between the rotor and the backing plate and feel it pinch your finger a little bit. So it looks like what we have here is a bad outer tie rod and a wheel bearing assembly. Okay, upon inspection on the other side, we found that this bellow boot is also slightly damaged on the end. So something else we might want to take care of. And Kyler, go ahead and shake it left to right. You feel the looseness there? Okay, so there is some looseness. It's kind of hard to see. Okay, I actually don't feel that pinch in my finger there. Let's see if we can move to the inner tie rod here. Sorry, Anthony. Might be able to see it since this boot's messed up. Yep, we can see right there we have a little bit of looseness. Again, I might be able to use my finger and see if it pinches my finger. Just like that. Yep, I can feel it right there. Okay. And you can see how it's very rusted. Again, that's probably because this boot is damaged. Dirt and moisture has gotten in there and caused it to rust and fail prematurely. Okay, go ahead and shake up and down.
I hate it when things are premature.
Anything there, Kyler?
Yeah.
No? Okay. So we're pretty good there. Okay, so first, obviously remove the wheel. After removing the wheel, I like to turn it all the way to the side. You might have to turn the key on to unlock the steering column. And next, we're gonna start by removing the brake caliper. Using an 18mm socket, I'm gonna remove the saddle bolts. Rotor, sometimes these are stuck on. You'll have to knock it off with a hammer. If you're gonna reuse the rotor, don't hit it on the brake pad surface.
It's a friction surface, not a brake pad surface. Seriously?
You can just voice that over, right? Okay, so your new wheel bearing should come with an ABS wheel speed sensor and wire attached. So we'll have to unclip the ABS wire all the way up here, connected right here. So this right here is what's attaching it to the vehicle. It just presses in there. Since our new one came with a new one, since our new bearing came with a new one, since our new, fuck you guys, fuck you. Since our new bearing came with a new one, we're actually just gonna remove this with a pry bar, screwdriver, anything you can get underneath there to pull it out. Sometimes you can get it by hand. Probably not gonna happen today.
With this bare hand.
That's right.
See that vein pop out of his neck? Damn. That wouldn't work on a Jaguar because a Jaguar has all aluminum body panels.
Ford did do that, didn't they?
It's made by Tata Motors, an Indian-owned company.
So we're just gonna remove the rest of these retainers. This one, it's kind of a pain in the ass to remove. This one right here can be removed by squeezing both of these tabs with a pair of pliers or breaking it off, whatever you want to do. Okay, and then there's one more right here. You might just be able to pull it out of there. You can get behind it with a screwdriver and pry it out of there as well. Not at this point, fuck it. So next we're gonna remove our axle nut. And first, it's advised that you use a wire brush on the threads of the axle so that it doesn't get cross-threaded or stuck as you're removing. Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. Look at wow,
Probably
this
good
was
enough.
like a crack.
Yeah. Axle nut's a 35mm. Now, the axle needs to be loose inside the bearing, so we're going to use an air hammer to try to break the axle loose inside the bearing and push it in this direction. You can see it's pretty stiff there. So if you don't have access to an air hammer, you can sometimes put the nut on and thread it on so that the nut is flush with the end of the axle, and tap it with a hammer. The reason you do this is so that you don't mess up the threads on the nut or the axle. Don't hit it too much. If it doesn't come loose, don't hit it too much, because you'll mushroom the end of this and you won't be able to reuse the axle or the nut. Now, as you can see, our axle is moving freely inside the bearing. And now we're going to move on to removing the 3 bolts that hold the bearing to the knuckle. And I don't know what size those are. If you're using an impact or sockets and a swivel, you want to try to avoid your socket or the swivel hitting the boot of the CV axle, as they're actually really fragile, and even the friction of the socket or the swivel hitting the boot can actually rupture a hole. So in my case, it actually looks like it might hit, so I'm going to use a short extension to get the swivel away from the CV axle boot. So we got pretty lucky here. I've done this bearing before, a few years ago. It looks like the bearing is loose in the knuckle. A lot of times they will get stuck. You'll have to beat on it real hard with a hammer here. And look, there's anti-seize on the CV axle splines. That's what helped make this so easy. Backing plate a little bit stuck to the bearing, so we can probably break loose with a hammer. Okay, don't put this on backwards.
Just don't put it on at all.
Just don't put it on at all. Okay, so to make it easier next time, in case you have to warranty out the bearing or something, or like in my case a few years later, have to replace it again, you're going to want to sand down this surface and also scrape out the corrosion and rust inside here. You do the majority of the pieces with like a big screwdriver or a pry bar. Get all those big chunks out of there. Feed your new wire through your backing plate. Show them down there. You're going to obviously orientate the backing plate to match up with the wheel speed sensor. Might help to have the knuckles straighter. I'm gonna drop the bearing. Watch it. Okay. And then at this point, try to start your bolts. At least one. I don't like to tighten these all at once. I prefer to do a little bit at a time to help seat it evenly. Make sure that I don't bend anything or cross thread anything. About 3 or 4 ugga-duggas ought to do it. The torque on these bolts isn't very imperative as long as they're tight. I prefer to tighten the wheel bearing mounting bolts before the axle nut because I can push the axle in. It helps me get a little bit more room for getting to those bolts with my socket and extension and all that. Okay. Let's go ahead and route our new ABS wire. I got it. Okay, so we're gonna connect that clip there, and then there's one more clip right here. There's a hole right here on the side. That's going to clip in right there. And then push this like right there. It may not stay very well, but that's what that's for, so that the wire doesn't get damaged. And we're going to clip this in right here. And then we're going to plug in the connector. Okay, make sure it's nice and snug. Not going to torque this yet. This has a very specified torque setting. This actually preloads the wheel bearing, so proper torque is imperative for longevity of the wheel bearing. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put the bearing and caliper on, and then I'll show you how to torque the wheel bearing.
The bearing and caliper?
Is that what I said? Oh. Cut! So I'm going to go ahead and put the rotor and caliper on, and then I'll show you how to torque the axle nut. So I've got the rotor and caliper installed, and to torque the axle nut, I'm actually gonna stick a pry bar or a screwdriver in the fin of the rotor. And as I go to torque the bearing, it's gonna stop the rotor from spinning and allow me to tighten this without it rotating. Okay, so we're gonna set our torque wrench to 103 foot-pounds. Maybe you ought to just turn it off.
Maybe I should turn you off.
Okay.
Oh, that was 104.
Dang, we gotta redo it.
Kind of a
Back it off, replace the bearing and the nut. Okay, so earlier you might have seen me put this nut on backwards to hold the rotor on. What that actually does, just having the nut on there, let me put it back up. Okay. The reason I put the nut on the rotor is actually to hold it flush against the hub to make it a lot easier to put the bearing in. Wow. Damn! Okay. Wow. Okay, we good?
Yeah.
Okay. The reason I put the nut on the rotor is actually to hold it flush against the hub. Makes it much easier to put the caliper on, to get the caliper over the rotor and to line up the bolt holes for the saddle. You also may have noticed that I put this nut on backwards. The whole reason I do that is because the threads inside there don't start for about 1/4 of an inch, and it makes it so that when I'm in a professional environment and I'm in a hurry, I only have to thread this on about 3/4 of an inch. So I can spin it on there real quick and be done. Okay, if I do it the other way, you can see that I have over an inch to thread that on. Just a useful little tech tip.
Does it record you?
Okay, on to, all right, now on to the doing everything.
Yes.
Thing every.
Yes.
Okay, on to doing the front end parts. I'm gonna start with the outer tie rod. I'm gonna go ahead and do the outer and the inner tie rod. I went ahead and bought the parts already. I'm just gonna go ahead and do it so I don't have to worry about them. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna remove the nut here and take the outer tie rod off and just let it hang. And then I'm just gonna go ahead and unscrew the inner tie rod and take them all off as one piece, assuming that everything goes as it should. I like to start by cleaning the rust off of the threads so that our nut comes off nice and easy. So we're using a 21mm to remove the nut from the outer tie rod. It's probably a lot easier with an impact than it is with hand tools because the stud of the tie rod can sometimes spin. Usually it's still stuck in the knuckle of the tie rod, usually the stud is still stuck in the knuckle, so it's usually not an issue, but sometimes if it's not, then the stud may spin and it might be difficult to remove the nut. You might have to use the torch to remove it. In our case, we did not have to. There's also another option. If you manage to at least break the nut loose and the stud starts to spin, you can see that the end of the stud actually has a hex head. So the trick is use a wrench on the nut. Okay, put the wrench on the nut and find a socket to fit the stud. In this case, it's a 10mm. You put that on there, and then let's just pretend that my nut is still there. I'm gonna hold that with the wrench, and I'm actually gonna put this, I'm actually gonna use my impact or ratchet in the tighten direction, and that's gonna screw the stud into the nut so that it can be removed if the nut is seized on the stud. Now to separate the outer tie rod from the knuckle, it's quickest to just bang it right here a couple times, real good with a hammer, and it should just pop out of there.
Bang it, you say?
Bang it good.
We'll put your purse down.
No need for a tie rod separating tool if you can get it that way. And sometimes you can heat this up as well, and it'll make it a little bit easier. Okay, next we're gonna remove the bellow boot. First we have a clamp here. This clamp is a one-time use. You can see, are you hungry? You can see right here, we can usually get a screwdriver in there and twist it and pop it off. There we go. And we can slide our boot down. I just got power steering fluid all over me. And you can see right here, this is evidence that my power steering rack is leaking. See the oil here? Mixed with a little bit of moisture and dirt. There's no up and down play. And right now I'm not gonna put a rack in this vehicle because it's, to be honest, a pain in the ass. Okay, you can see that this tie rod actually has a plastic sleeve on it. This needs to be pushed back. And then you can see that there's flat spots here. Now, some vehicles require a special tool to get this loose because they're set back really far. You can actually turn the wheel on some cars, including this one. You can actually turn the wheel so that you have access to this. And we don't necessarily need to use the inner tie rod tool. We're gonna try a pair of pliers, which are somewhere
In your pocket.
They are kind of tight. There should be Loctite on there.
We're just gonna wing the alignment, right?
Yeah, totally.
We don't have access to alignment rack.
Okay, and there it is. Okay, we've got the right side here. This is actually just a plastic protector. We're just gonna remove that and throw that away. Don't lose your nut. We've got a new cotter pin, a new grease zerk, and a jam nut. Okay. Next we're gonna install our grease zerk. And then I pre-installed a jam nut and a little bit of anti-seize. Thread the new outer tie rod into the inner tie rod. And then insert the stud of the tie rod into the knuckle. Install your castle nut. I guess I can turn this.
Man, look at that bellows.
Yeah. Okay. So when torquing this, there's a hole that goes through the stud and it has to be lined up with a slot in the castle nut. So you're gonna torque it until it's tight and then go to the next slot so that you can put a cotter pin in. Okay, and then I have my cotter pin and my side cuts. Install the cotter pin. and then pull it tight and flip that over. And then you can flip this end off. There you go. And then this right here, you're probably gonna wanna cinch that down after you eyeball it so that it's pretty straight with the other side. And then you're gonna need to have an alignment done at a professional shop. Hey guys, thanks for watching. If you liked the video, hit the like button. If you didn't like the video, hit the dislike button. Leave a comment. Be sure to subscribe. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Drive safe and always wear your seatbelt.
Hey guys, thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe and hit that like button. Leave a comment below if you have a problem with your Trailblazer. Maybe we can help you out.
Ready?